Welcome to On the Verge. This is Zach Sped, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. On tonight's episode, we're welcoming a special guest as Dr. Stephen Loftus of Baltimore Sports and Life joins us to break down the upcoming 2021 MLB draft. In that discussion, we're going to take a little bit closer look at what the Orioles draft strategy might look like and the players that they could be considering at number 5. In addition, Bob, Nick, and I will be doing our weekly segment in which we highlight a player outside of our top 30 prospect list that has impressed us of late. And that will give us an opportunity to quickly recap some of the opening action from the Florida Coast League that took place on Monday. So that will be on tonight's episode. But first, On the Verge is brought to you courtesy of Mercer Floor and Home Carpet One. Mercer is a third-generation family business that was established in 1959 and is located on Main Street in beautiful historic downtown Westminster, Maryland. For all of your flooring needs, think Mercer. So as we do each show, typically at the end, but tonight we're going to do it at the beginning, we profile a player outside of our top 30 prospects list and talk about what they've done lately, whether it's been an impressive game, an impressive week, and explain why we think they should be on your radar. So starting us off tonight is going to be Nick.
Yeah, this one, well, I got 2. I'm going to cheat because I have to mention the other one. But I want to mention Christopher Cespedes, and he's not going to be a top 30 prospect anytime soon. I'll get that out of the way now. But over the last week, he did go 5 for 21, so only a 238 average. But he hit 3 home runs, and 2 of those were grand slams for Delmarva. So, he's hitting 209 for the year, 34 strikeouts in 30 games. He's also like 23. I think he's about to turn 24 years old. So minor league phase, Rule 5 draft guy a couple years ago. Orioles drafted him for those high exit velocity numbers that he had. He's showing them off. He's having his moment. So shout out to Christopher Cespedes. And I also real quickly just want to highlight Zach Peek and Houston Roth. Houston Roth, guy out of Ole Miss, the Orioles drafted recently. Zach Peek, of course, part of the Dylan Bundy trade. Peek started twice this week against Fredericksburg, and Roth relieved him both times. And combined, they went 17 innings, allowed just 2 runs, walked 3 guys, and struck out 24. So I was glad to watch those 2 starts, and I'm declaring the Dylan Bundy trade a victory in the Orioles' favor.
Yeah, I would expect Peek to be making an appearance at Aberdeen before long, and then maybe Roth can get that chance to just take his starting rotation spot. Maybe that's what they're doing there. But that was excellent to see.
Peek seems to be getting better and better as the season goes on, and his K-strut seems to be getting even better than it already was. So Zach Peek certainly should be on your radar if he wasn't already. My pick for this week is Gene Pinto, who pitched in the Florida Complex League today and made his debut as an Oriole. He was one of the players that the Orioles acquired in the offseason as part of the Jose Iglesias trade. And in his outing on Monday, he went 4 innings, allowed 2 hits, 1 run, walked 2, and struck out 6. One thing to note is that Pinto had not pitched in the United States League before today. His only professional experience was 12 innings pitched back in 2019 in the Dominican Summer League with the Angels. 20 years old, and according to StatCast data that's available over at Baseball Savant, Pinto did touch 94 today with his fastball. So he's been a guy that some fans may have heard of because of the Iglesias trade, but when we've talked about that deal, we've talked more about Garrett Stallings and what we think he can do. Pinto seemingly was a bit of a throw-in at the time, but if today's outing is any indication, we should be paying closer attention to him.
Yeah, that was just good to see. Fresh start, young kid, a lot of swing and misses too. He got in that outing. So, I mean, those numbers down in the Florida Complex League now, not GCL anymore, they are what they are. But, I mean, he's a young guy, and which, like you mentioned, he hasn't thrown since 2019. So he's off to a good start. You got to feel good about that. I'm sure he feels great about that as well.
Yeah, Garrett Stallings too. It's all about Gene Pinto. No, it's just good to see these guys get professional bats, and that ties into my player who I picked, who is Luis Gonzalez, the former Arizona Diamondback outfielder, turned 19 or 18-year-old. No, he played center field. He batted like 3rd or 4th in the lineup for the FCL Orioles, and he went 2 for 3 with a double and a walk. I mean, this is a guy who the Orioles, I think he was the highest paid of that vaunted first Mike Elias international draft signing class for like $475,000, and he was put it all on display today. Obviously, it's just the first game of the season, but just good to see these guys get out there, see these names, and get familiar with them. and maybe even some will just be names that we hadn't been eagerly awaiting, and they'll dominate the headlines before long too. So just wanted to shout out Luis Gonzalez, Steven Acevedo, and the rest of the international signings, and Kobe Mayo, who hit a ball almost 106 miles per hour, hit a double. It's Mayo season. Get the Mayo jar out, put a quarter in it. I don't know what I'm talking about, but just glad that the league has got started today.
Yeah, I was glad to see that as well. Just looking at the rosters that we got this morning, some pretty stacked outfield as far as name recognition goes. A lot of guys we've been hearing about from Matt Blood and Kobe Perez, guys they've talked about. So it's good to finally at least get some box scores. But my offer still stands if they need somebody to run a video. I'm willing to move.
Well, if we can see Luis Gonzalez in that video feed, that would be well worth it. He's certainly somebody that you've been hearing more about leading up to the start of the Florida Complex League, and I think he showed a little bit of that today. So definitely interested to see what he does over the summer. So on that note, now we're going to turn our attention over to the draft, and this will be our final preview before the draft, which begins on July 11th. And joining us on tonight's show is Dr. Stephen Loftus. If you're a reader of Baltimore Sports and Life or you listen to the show regularly, you're familiar with Stephen's work. We always appreciate his insight. And Stephen, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here. Really excited. 2 weeks before the draft. Things are starting to get fun now.
So we did want to mention at the top of the show that you have a new article over at Baltimore Sports and Life today where you updated your draft model. Can you give some of our listeners a background on the draft model and some of the changes you just made to it?
Yeah, sure. So the draft model is my version of what every team basically has. Some version of combining all the biographical details, college stats, outside rankings. Thing I don't have is internal rankings, of course, and any other information that we have to a single score of some sort of form for the players. Now, in this case, so the thing that I led the article with, I'm a statistician. That's my training. That's what education was in. And one thing that's drilled into us all the time is that all models are wrong. Every model, no matter how good, is wrong. Some are useful. So I'm constantly making changes to the model. So in the last month or so, I've completely overhauled a lot. All sorts of things of how I adjust the college stats, for quality of opponents, accounting for, the fact that some guys might hit 400 in 20 plate appearances, and that doesn't mean as much, adjusting all of these things, just lots of little adjustments. And there was a lot of movement. Lots of players moved around, moving up and down. And it's really interesting to see how some of these changes have turned out. Guys like, things that we expect to see. Jack Leiter finally made his rise up from what was before like 7th in the model. Now he's 2nd overall. A lot of things are now coming into line right before the draft hits, in 13 days.
So you were last on our show in April. And at that point in time, it seemed like it was the two Vanderbilt pitchers, Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker, were still kind of seen as the top options to go first overall to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now we're closer to the draft, but yet the mock drafts that are coming out seem to be all over the place, not just with the Orioles, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on, but really with those top 5 teams and with those top 5 picks. Do things sometimes feel just as uncertain now as they did in April when we were much earlier in the season?
I mean, it does seem like there's more uncertainty. Like even if you extend it out past Rocker and Leiter, the top 4 seem pretty well set with the two of them, Lawler, Mayer, and Henry Davis. He wasn't quite there as a solid 5th, but there seemed to be like 4.5 solid spots there. Now you got a top 3 of, again, still Leiter, Lawler, and Mayer. But beyond that, no one's really sure on those last 2 who's rounding out that top 5. There seems to be a bit more coalescence around, 2 of the other high school shortstop options, with Khalil Watson really kind of rising up there, and Brady House. You could argue if he's a shortstop, but that kind of group of 4 really starting to come into play for pretty much every team in the top 4. It seems like Leiter's pretty well set there in that top 5, but we're not really sure. Kumar Rocker, now the range is anywhere between 4 and 7, it seems, for him. Jackson Jobe, high school, no one knows where he's going to go. I've seen him as early as, I think the highest I've seen him is 4th overall to the Tigers, which I would personally love to see that because that opens up a lot of options for the Orioles. But yeah, it seems like there is a little less certainty. Now, in a week's time, I think there will be a little bit. This is a weird year. There's a lot of options that teams could take at number one. There's not a clear top guy or even top two necessarily to choose from, like, when it was Rutschman and Witt. But because of that, there's so many options. I don't think we're going to really see clarity even up till the day of the draft. We might not 100% know where things are going to go.
Yeah. To follow that up, I just thought about this though. It feels like this year, in your opinion, do you think that this year is more just weird compared to last year due to COVID wiping out 2020, and that's what's causing a lot of this at the top of the draft, or is it just the talent level? Like there's not that clear 1-1.
I mean, there's probably some of that in there. We would have another full year of Leiter with more pitch FX data. You'd have another year with Rocker, same sort of thing. Henry Davis might have been able to establish a bit more of a track record, all that. But I do think it's because the talent in this case, this particular, not that there's a lack of talent or anything. There's just not this clear tier of, top one, top two, or anything like that. It's a lot more even of a spread there at the top. There's, in a sense, not as much drop off as you usually see from 1, 2, 3, 5, etc., which works great for the Orioles in that sense because we don't have that top two pick sort of thing.
So speaking about the Orioles, let's talk Orioles specific now. Every mock draft seems to have someone different coming in at pick number 5. Is this because the draft class is just so volatile at this point, or because you think people are now just they're not sure on how to peg how Michael Elias is going to attack this draft?
A bit of both. I mean, I think people are really, as upset as you can get about this stuff, upset that they missed the underslot last year so badly. And so I think there might be, even in some cases, maybe a little overstatement of how much underslot possibility there is. I do think there is some this year, and this is a year where it could absolutely happen. But I think there's a little bit of an overstatement of it. That said, again, combined with the talent and the roughly even nature at the top, it seems like, gives the opportunity for a lot of things to happen. It seems like most mock drafts are leaning Lawler and Mayer some form 1 and 2. Leiter seems to be a popular Boston pick, but we're not really sure where Detroit's going because they have similar sort of thing. They're building from the ground up, very, very much so. They have a lot of options that they could go. I mean, I have seen Henry Davis, I have seen Jackson Jobe, I've seen Khalil Watson, I've seen Brady House go to them. And when you have that many options right ahead of you, that's going to open up so many possibilities for the pick that's right after you because, the Orioles would have interest in many of those same sort of guys. Maybe not Jobe. I don't necessarily see Elias going for a high school pitcher necessarily. That might be my own bias. These high school pitchers are just such a rough way to go on that end of things that I would find it hard to think that the Orioles would go that route. But again, still, there's so many opportunities there, both at 4 for Detroit and 5 for the Orioles, that you're not going to really find a consensus at that point. It would be really, really hard to find. And again, I don't think we'll see any sort of consensus even on draft day.
Okay, so what do you make of a couple recent mock drafts? One is MLB Pipeline's latest with having the Orioles take Henry Davis at number 5. And I know Baseball America just came out with Khalil Watson going to them today. But back to Davis, does he even fall to that spot at number 5, do you think? And if so, would the Orioles pick him?
I don't know if he falls because, again, Detroit, there seems to be intel coming out of, the Pittsburgh, Texas, Boston sort of camps that seems to have somewhat of a coalescing around those top 3 picks. But Detroit just is where things can just go awry real fast. So again, there's definitely a chance that Davis falls to the Orioles. Definitely could happen. Would they take him? And that's a tough one because if you're the Orioles, if you're taking Davis, you're not seeing him as a full-time catcher. You're seeing him at best, taking that 5th day, give Adley a break, 4 or 5 years down the line. You're seeing him as a corner outfielder or a third baseman. And in that case, you really have to believe in the bat, especially once you get him out to the corner outfield. You really have to believe in the bat as something special that can play in the outfield. He absolutely can play those positions. He's not a complete plotter behind the plate or anything like that. He can move well enough and has enough athleticism that he should be able to handle those positions, well enough. Decent chance that it's a tick below average or that sort of thing. But you have to really believe in the bat. And when he moves off of catcher, he really does lose a lot of value. It's a real big question at that point because, again, you have to really believe in the bat, first of all, and the fact that you're moving him off of the premium position. Now, granted, catcher, I think, is going to lose some of that premium once they go to the automated strike zone. But it's still, once you move them off that premium position, you have to believe in the bat even more. I don't necessarily see the Orioles going for that. I think there are better options there at 5, even if they take one of the players that I personally like better, like Khalil Watson. I like Khalil Watson very much at 5 for the Orioles. And even if Detroit takes him, I still think there are better options there than Davis.
I tend to agree with you, but let's just say, all right, he falls to 5. The Orioles believe in the bat. They draft him. Do you think they would, or should even, try to develop him as a catcher for a while before transitioning, or just immediately transition him off a catcher, kind of like keep it as an option while working him in at other places? How do you think they should handle that? If that were to happen?
There's no harm in keeping him behind the plate, but you have to look for at least a certain amount of time, but you have to look further down the line of where his ultimate role would be if both he and Rutschman are on the team. Like, you're not drafting him to be trade bait or anything like that. You're drafting him to be a part of the organization. So, like, if he's catching 2-3 days a week, maybe he's catching more in his first year as he's transitioning to the professional lifestyle, all of that sort of thing. But long term, starting in instructional league this fall, you get him out on the infield dirt because that's where you have at least a little bit more value. If you think he can play on the infield dirt, that's where you get him out there in October, November. And from there, maybe he's catching 2 days a week, just to keep his hand in there and all that sort of thing, because that sort of positional flexibility does have value, and to completely remove that from his equation would be a disservice to him, I think, in that way.
So we're going to go a listener question here that we got from the message board over at BaltimoreSportsAndLife.com, and this comes from 2035. Some what-if questions. If Leiter happens to be there at 5, would Baltimore take him or pass? Let's assume the top 4 are Lawler, Mayer, Davis, and Watson. Let's now assume the top 4 are the same 3 shortstops in Leiter instead of Davis. Would the O's take Davis? And then the last part of this question is, in what order do you think the O's rank the 4 prep shortstops and are all in play for them at 5?
Okay, so first off, with the Leiter going at 4 and Davis is sitting there at 5, do they take Davis? As I said, I don't think so. I still think there's value there that surpasses Davis on that one. Even if you go the underslot route and all that, I think there are better options there. So setting that one aside, if Leiter is there at 5, that could get interesting because, as of right now, as I said, I have Leiter as my number 2 draft score on the board. He has put up an incredible season. There are some slight question marks, like he has a higher walk rate than you'd really like to see. He's given up more home runs than you'd really like to see. So would they take him at 5? I think at that point, it would really all come down to, do you have to pay him like the number 2 guy or pay him like the number 3 guy? Finances are, this whole process is far from independent of finances. And so I think, can you get away with paying him first off like the number 5 guy? Because he could play the hard line and say, I want to get paid like the number 3 pick where I thought I was going to be, at which point I don't think they would overpay for him. I don't think they would go that route. But if he was willing to, play at the 5 slot and, even take a little bit less, that's a tough one. Because at that point, you still have available Brady House. And I have Brady House coming in at number 6. So there's a pretty hefty difference, I will admit, between their scores, about 10 runs worth, which is a lot. It's the difference between, let's see, it's like the equivalent of getting an extra number 30 pick basically in the draft and in back of the first round pick in terms of value. So that's a real tough one because Elias has shown that he's more willing to wait on pitchers. I really can't answer that because that's a lot, in my view. It's a lot of value to turn down. I think, again, assuming he's willing to take the number 5 slot, I think I would pull that trigger, but I don't know if Elias would necessarily. So that question really all comes down to money, and that's something that we can't necessarily, unfortunately, know. And then let's see, the last one was ranking the 4 prep shortstops from the Orioles perspective, I believe, on that one.
Yes.
Let's
Do
see.
we want to do that, or do we want to come back to that one?
I can take it now or later, either way.
We can go ahead and do it now.
Okay.
Let's talk about these guys now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're the top guys, and they're probably going to be the guys that we're talking about in 13 days. So you could go back and forth on Mayer or Lawler. Me personally, I have Mayer at 1, Lawler at 2, and then I have Watson and House only because I don't know if House is really a shortstop. Like, I think he's going to be able to play sufficient shortstop, but I don't know if he's going to stick there long term. There are a lot of people that think he can. If I was sure that he was going to, I would probably put him above Watson, but because there's that question, I would knock him down. I would knock him down just a peg on that one. Are they available at 5? Lawler and Mayer, I don't think there's any way. I don't think they're in any way, shape, or form making it to the Orioles at 5. And if they were, they would be well within their rights to command a number 1 or number 2 bonus. And again, I don't think the Orioles are paying up on that one. Watson definitely has a chance. I think it's going to come down to Detroit again, and I would love to see Watson fall there. I have Watson. I believe he's number 5 on mine. Number 4. Kumar Rocker's number 5. Watson's number 4, and I would love to see him with the Orioles. And even better, you could maybe even get away with paying him a little bit, not much, little bit under slot, since he's ranked 6th by Baseball America at that point. It is 6, right? It is 6. Okay, yeah. So you might be able to get him to take just a tick less, even a couple $100,000 that you could put to later round picks or something like that. House absolutely in play, no question. Tigers are another one that could be interested in him, but if the Tigers take him, then Watson's available, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So Mayer and Lawler, out of play. There's no way. Watson and House absolutely in play and should be given very careful consideration. The Orioles do seem to like him. Elias has been at their games, been present there, and there's been a lot of buzz connecting the Orioles to those 2 guys. So it'll be interesting to see where that kind of goes.
I want to, since we're talking about those guys real quick, I just want to, can you expand on Watson as a player a little bit more, like what you see out of him, what he brings to the table, what he projects as? I was reading a little bit about him today because the high school guys, I'm relying on you and your appearances on the show for this information. But Watson does seem like a guy that I quickly fell in love with just reading reports and watching some videos. I like his flash on the field. I like his personality. He's not afraid to show. If you listen to this show, I love those types of guys. But there seemed to be is it more – what I was reading was, is it more power tool over a hit tool type deal? Is his size an issue? He seems like a smaller frame guy, but a lot of people don't seem concerned about those issues. So I guess, can you just talk about who this Watson guy is? What kind of player is he?
He's an interesting guy because he is, yes, a little, comparative. He's 5'9", but he's not, skinny or anything like that. What he really brings is fast hands, real good hands. I mean, I'm not sure what type of grade I would put on the hands. I haven't seen quite enough of good video to really good a gauge on it. But, when you think about guys with fast hands, you think guys like Javi Baez, and that's the type of guy that you could dream on a little bit in that sort of way, in terms of that sort of power. Because Watson is able to, even though he's a little guy, he's able to turn those real fast hands into, guys are putting, with a 5'9" guy, you would not expect 55 grade power or anything like that. You would expect much less. And, 55 doesn't sound like all that great shakes. But again, when it comes in a package that size, that's not bad there. And the hit tool, it works well enough. There's some debate. Is it, average? Is it plus? Is it, half plus sort of thing? But in any event, it works well enough that the power in game can play. He's a great athlete. He's able to run. Some guys have seen apparently 70 grade times off of him. Now there's some worry Can he stick at shortstop? Does he move to second base or center field? To me, I mean, heck, if he moves to center field, I'm fine with that. That's still a premium position. But from what little bit I've seen of his infield work, and again, it's minimal video, it looks like he has the tools to stick. I think he has enough arm to stick at shortstop. And so again, it's not 70 grade power. It's not Brady House power or anything like that, but it's a better hit tool than Brady House. And, it's a guy that I think could play. It's a guy that I think could do good things, even in that kind of small package that he is indeed.
I saw the Jazz Chisholm comp. Sorry, I saw the Jazz Chisholm comp and I got excited. So
yeah, no, that's not a bad one either. Yeah.
So kind of pivoting back for a minute to pitchers, and we've talked a little bit how it seems unlikely that Jack Leiter is going to fall to number 5, but it's looking more likely that Kumar Rocker could be available at that spot. We've heard about some of the concerns with Rocker this spring. If he does fall to number 5, what reservations are surrounding him that may make the Orioles or any other team pass on him?
Okay, yeah. So Rocker's been, of course, in the discussion the whole year, came in ranked number 1, whole deal. The best comparison, or not comparison, the best summary I've heard of this is that there's basically 2 Kumar Rockers. One of them sits at 90. One of them's fastball sits at 94 to 96, can top out at 99, and has a possibly like double plus slider sort of thing. That's a top 3 pick. That's at worst a top 5 pick. Then you have the other guy that sits 91 to 93, tops at 96, still a plus slider, but we're not talking double plus. We're talking like a 60 slider or something like that. That guy is a first round pick, not top 5, but still a first round pick. So the problem is you got to pay him like the top 5 pick if you're taking him pretty much. Maybe if he falls to 7, which, we've seen in several mocks, maybe you're able to get him at 7, but that's going to still be a tough ask given where he started the year. And the fact that he has a near untouchable statistical profile. He has a better walk rate when it comes down to it than Jack Leiter. And Jack Leiter is supposed to be the one with the, better control command, or at least that's the kind of initial thought that people were thinking when it came into the year. Kumar Rocker has, better in that regard. He's had a big College World Series. He will be going 24 hours from now, I guess. The Vanderbilt Mississippi State game should be just starting right now, actually. And he'll be going in game 2. Leiter's going tonight. And if he puts in a big clutch performance against Mississippi State tomorrow, that could pump him up a little bit, possibly. But just the questions are going to come down to which Rocker do you get? Sometimes if you're really looking at him, sometimes it looks like the delivery might have a little bit of effort in it, which, can bring fears of a reliever sort of profile or anything like that. He's going to start. He's going to have one of the longest leases we've seen in a long time to be a starter. But those are the things that are going to cause teams to pause especially in the top 5. When you start getting into the, 7, 8 range, that's when you can start being comfortable with, okay, do I take the bet that he's the top 3 guy, or just merely a first round pick with the potential that's back there that he has flashed many times over the course of his Vanderbilt career?
On Leiter, real quick, you've been there working with the Rays. You've been at these games, talked to these scouts. Leiter's game, his last outing when he went 120 something pitches that last outing. I'm just curious, are teams watching that and freaking out, pounding their head on the table when they saw him go back out there for, I think, the 8th inning?
I can guarantee you they're not necessarily thrilled. I mean, he's probably not going to pitch this year, I'd bet. After, he's probably going to get signed. Maybe we'll throw an inning or two, but how many innings is he up to this year? He's got to be over 100 by now. Let's see. But regardless, no matter how many innings he's had, it's a big ramp up from last year. It's a big change from last year. Yeah, he's should have just topped 100, or he's going to top 100 innings tonight if he hasn't. But again, he's probably not going to pitch this year because teams are just going to be real careful with him. So even with these longer outings, it's not great, but given the longer term view, it's, assuming that things don't go awry tonight, of course, it's probably not the worst thing in the world. I mean, tonight's going to be his last college start. So we'll just see what happens from there. But I don't think teams are just absolutely killing themselves about this.
That was a fun conversation to watch unfold on social media. But with Rocker, yeah, it seems like it's, I don't know, maybe just a lot of prospect fatigue. I've heard people talk about that. It's, Rocker's been the presumed 1-1 for like 2 years now, so it's like, all right, we want to see him. It's this prospect fatigue setting in. But I heard a good point, and I'll credit the guys over at Prospects Live. Were talking about this a couple weeks ago. And they're talking about bringing the Orioles and bringing Kumar Rocker in to see what the Orioles have done with Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall and Kyle Bradish even this year. I guess like for anybody who wants to comment on this, like if the Orioles brought in a Kumar Rocker type pitcher, like what could they do with him? And how are we going to be able to sell this to the fans that the Orioles pass up on a guy like Kumar Rocker if he's there?
I mean, they have done incredibly wonderful development work, and you all know better than me on this one because that's what you all look at. You've seen the results of this, and no question they could do this. But with the draft, it's all going to be a question of value. The whole enterprise is a question of value. Is there a better value? Rocker is, as again, number 5 on my rankings. He has a score of, let's see, 26.97, just shy of 28, which basically is, the way the score basically is, that's the expected number of runs above replacement. So you're looking at like a 2.5, 3-win player on average when you're looking at him, depending on how the runs above replacement wind out over the years and all that. But that's what you're looking at when you're drafting him. But is there going to be a better value? Is there a higher ceiling? Khalil Watson's right ahead of him at a score of just a little bit above 28. But the thing is, Watson is younger and has a higher ceiling from a score perspective. Watson has a ceiling of Rocker, I think, if I remember correctly on these scores, because I looked this up because I was thinking about this recently, Rocker has a ceiling from the score perspective of like a 5-win guy. Watson has a ceiling of like a 7-win guy. And it's all a question of value. And so is Rocker the right value at that point? Is Watson the right value? Because again, pitchers are inherently more risky and inherently less, from a pure wins above replacement level, less valuable. So I would give the Orioles development team a better chance to turn a different pitcher, to turn a 4th rounder into a 5-win pitcher than a 4th round shortstop or a 5th round shortstop into a 7-win type of Khalil Watson's possible ceiling. So
there is one follow-up question I have on Kumar Rocker. The example that I keep going back to is the year that Mark Appel was expected to go number 1, but the Astros took Carlos Correa. Appel falls to the Pirates, decides I'm not signing bets on himself. And for him, it paid off in the sense that he was the number 1 pick the following year. You've talked a lot tonight about the bonuses and whether or not you're going to have to pay up. If you're the Orioles and you think Kumar Rocker might bet on himself and we have to go over slot at number 5 to get him, do you draft him? And would Rocker take that path?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. Again, everything is so much in context. It depends on who you're pitting Rocker up against. If you were pitting him up against Jack Leiter, who was willing to sign for the same money, you'd probably take Leiter at that point. Just comparing the two, I don't know if the Orioles would go that route. Again, pitchers have a lot of questions, but that is the bet. Are the players that are there? If they go back, are they going to become those number 1 guys? Same thing with high schoolers, for that matter. So I remember with the Rays 2017, we drafted Brendan McKay at number 4. We went back and looked at some of the high school reports. They had him as like I'm trying to remember it. So our system had guys at like 1A, 1B, 2, 3, 4, 5, where 1A, 1B were the highest. The Brendan McKay high school report was like a 3. And at the end, when he was coming up there, he was a 1A, and we joking like, see, this is what those 3 high schoolers can turn into in 3 years, sort of thing. So it is a bet. So you could ask the exact same question of, Khalil Watson or someone like that. If you pass on him, if you draft him and kind of undersell him on the slot, and he's going to NC, he's signed by NC State. If he went to NC State for 3 years, don't think it's going to happen. But if he did, what's he going to look like in 3 years? What's the possibilities there? So that is admittedly the bet. Again, I don't think the Orioles would take that risk on Rocker. It would really, though, I think that one's going to come down to information that I don't have in my model, particularly the pitch FX information, because they have it, and they have studied it to no end on Rocker. And that's, they've seen his down days, the days when he's pitching 91 to 93. And they've seen the spin rates on those. If the spin rates are fine, if they think it's a blip, if they've checked out the medicals and all that, maybe they consider it. But again, I don't think I see it. It would be a surprise to me if they went that route.
Switching gears a bit, just from reading Twitter and Orioles fans all over the place, it seems like most of them want either Leiter or Rocker, one of those Vandy arms, or a high school shortstop. That's the exciting picks. And some are even warming up to Colton Cowser, including Eric Birdland, who took him in the Prospects Live mock draft and then got a nice steal in the second round with James Woods. Shout out. But what about Sal Frelick as an option? Last time you were on, you mentioned seemed like his trend was going in the wrong direction. But how did he finish the season? And you think there's any reason to keep an eye on him as the 5th pick?
So yeah, it seemed like right as we were talking, he had started kind of arresting that downfall. He got off to a real hot start, went through a little slow stretch, and then from literally the last podcast that I was on to the end of the season, he batted his season line. He just basically stayed constant. So the last, unfortunately for him, his season ended early because Boston College did not have a great year. But his last end of the season line, basically from podcast on, was 352, 434, 521. So there are tools there. There are tools that definitely can play. Like, he is a 60 center fielder, 60 speed, 60 bat type of guy. He walks about the same rate as striking out. We're talking about 12% this year, something like that. But there are some questions, and this is the big one for me, and namely, the power isn't there. We're talking like 40, maybe 45 grade power. Now, yes, it's possible that he adds some there, but the thing is, he seems to be at his physical maturity level sort of thing right now. Well, for a comparison, he's 5'9", 175, and Cleo Watson is pretty much the same size. And Watson's grading out at 55 power, Frelick's grading out at 40 power. 40, 45, depending on who you look at, of course. So the lack of power for me is a bit of a concern, especially at that low of a rate. So there are tools there that you could absolutely see him picked at 5. And if he does, he better sign for take a major cut there. It better be for a big underslot signing. I still think there are better underslot options if you're going to go that route with him. But I can see why. I truly can see why. But for me personally, there's enough questions with the lack of power that I think there's just going to be a lack of value there longer term, just due to that at this point, especially once he switches to wood bat.
So looking at the other outfielder that has been mentioned a lot as a possible underslot pick is Colt Cowser. Can you talk about what kind of player he is, what put him in the position to be an early first-round draft pick, and what kind of player he projects to become the next level? Yeah,
so I've liked Colton Cowser for a little while. Let me check my notes here. I mean, basically the main reason why he's up this high is he has hit. He has always hit. He has been a hitter. Even when you start talking about the conference that he plays in, he has just always been a hitter. So, I mean, honestly, if he put up like 80, 90% of the production that he put up at Sam Houston, and he did this in the ACC or in the SEC, he'd be a top 5 pick. He would be teams would be loving to try to get him in their organization. So what we're looking at with him, this year, now granted, yes, small conference, all those questions that come into there, but we're looking at a slash line of like 374, 490, 680. So we're looking at about 300 ISO, give or take. So has power to play with. Walks more than he strikes out, walked 17% of the time, stole 17 bases, which is for him an 85% success rate. Even more, he's played for Team USA back in 2019, I believe, and had good wood bat performance. And the thing is, like, he's consistently been able to catch up to fastballs when he's faced, harder velocity, all that. So the fact that he's able to catch up to those fastballs, really able to turn, doesn't swing and miss at them, really is kind of allaying those concerns about the small conference sort of background that he has. So, and from a body sort of perspective, so we're looking at like 6'3", 195, a little on the skinnier side, skinnier in terms of, if you're looking at BMI, skinnier than Sal Frelick, has a better power sort of potential, even though he is, skinnier, quote unquote. So you have a couple of options. If he stays more on the skinny side, he absolutely has the tools to stick in center field. If he bulks up a little bit more, you would expect more power is going to come with that. And yeah, you move him out to left field, or left field or right field, but he has a solid enough arm that could work with. But, just as he is, we're looking at a left-handed bat that has a good chance to stick in center field, that has pop, that has speed. All of those are things that really you can build on. And the one question you have to ask is it all a small conference, mid-major illusion? But even some of the things behind that have made evaluators say that, yeah, I'd be willing to bet on that profile. Honestly, if you're going at an underslot, he's the guy that I really like at that. Because, Baseball America has him at number 11, which if the Orioles paid him at the 11 slot, that's $1.5 million, I believe, in savings. And you could spread that around. And with what you're getting at that point, so let's see. I have him ranked, let's see. He is 13th in my model rankings at about 16. He's back behind a few pitchers. There are a lot of good college performers who've seen their stock rise. But again, at that point in time, that's a value that I'd be willing to take an underslot bet on to, give to the development team and see if they can really tap into that power that he seems to have.
So we had a question on Twitter, and this is more about players in general and not specific to Colton Cowser. For college players, how much in which conference they've played in factors into a team's evaluation?
Yeah, it definitely comes into play. Certain teams, certain organizations are going to lean more heavily on the big conference guys. Teams are going to like, okay, yes, this guy has faced SEC pitching, which is no question, the best conference in college baseball. The fact that no matter who wins the College World Series this year, 7 of the last 11 champions have come from the SEC tells you enough right there. So there are teams that are going to love that. The other it's not a bias exactly, but the other benefit that those players have is the fact that big conference guys are going to see a lot of time in front of TrackMan. So you're going to know the exit velocities. You're going to know what they have there. You're going to see the spin rates on those guys. You're going to see what they really have. And those things don't have a conference effect. Those things don't come to play. So the fact that large conferences have that, there's going to be a bias towards those guys because of that extra information. Again, how much it is hard to say. I include conference effects in my model. So I calculate and include a strength of schedule component in some portions of the model. I believe probably the most influential one actually is secondary strength of schedule. So the win percentage of the win percentage. I forget, but look up secondary strength of schedule. I forget the exact description for it, but basically how your opponents did. And that has shown some predictive effect where guys who played a better secondary strength of schedule, i.e. a stronger conference, more or less, tend to wind up doing a little bit better in the longer run. Not a huge effect, but a little effect.
I like that. I'm kind of sold on Colton Cowser, if that's the pick as well. I'd also heard that, I think it was, I can't remember where I was listening to this to give them proper credit, but I guess it was on fastballs 97 and up. Cowser was the number 1 hitter in the country at the highest averagings. And we had Eric Longenhagen on. A lot of guys that we seemed kind of excited about. His first comment was like, well, yeah, they can't hit high fastballs.
Right.
So, that's.
Now, admittedly, it's going to be interesting, to take this to the major league side of things, with the whole crackdown on the sticky stuff and all that sort of thing. How players are evaluated in the draft is going to probably change at least a little bit. It might take a little longer, but there's going to be probably repercussions, not only at the major league level that everyone's talking about, but also in the amateur realm as well, not only in terms of the literal player performance themselves, but how they're evaluated. So maybe that's less important later on because, high fastballs aren't as devastating as they used to be, but it's still something that I would, given all the options, I'd still like to see that out of a player because, it's going to take a while for that to come out of the game, if it does at all.
So talking big picture strategy in here with the Orioles and Mike Elias, is there enough evidence that Mike Elias will definitely go underslot like a lot of Orioles fans seem to think? If he does, do you think this is a bad thing in this year's draft? There seems to be a lot of negativity in Birdland right now at the major league level, and that seems to be drifting into the rest of the organization as a whole, which seems kind of unjustified, starting a bit of a civil war on social media. But big picture strategy there.
So as I said earlier, I don't think there's enough evidence to say that he's definitely doing it. I think might be a little bit of overestimation of that. I definitely think it could happen, but I think there's a little overestimation of that because everyone got burned a little bit last year. Everyone was not necessarily expecting that. So because everyone missed on that, I think they're upping the chances of it a little bit. I kind of see a bit of a drop after the first 6-7 guys, really. Really after Brady House, I start seeing a little bit of a drop there. So unless you're really going to go for the underslot, I don't necessarily see, well, there's so many different routes that they could go. But again, I don't think it's a guaranteed thing because you look at everyone wants to cite the Carlos Correa pick. Everyone loves citing that. And yes, it was underslot, all that sort of thing. But the thing is, prices are set externally. Prices are set by what everyone else is willing to pay and by external factors. Best player is an internal thing. And the high school shortstop is one of the best demographics, no question. So in front of Correa that year, you had Mike Zunino. College catchers, they do all right. 4 college pitchers. Pitchers are variable. I could easily see an argument where, yes, Byron Buxton's number 1, but Carlos Correa is number 2 and not off by that much. And you'll even look at, some of Elias's, some of Houston's picks after that. The Mark Appel, the Brady Aiken picks. All of those guys were best available. Alex Bregman, you picked him at 5. Wait a minute. They pick him at 5 or 8. Well, he was a top guy regardless. And again, with shortstops, you absolutely have a lot of value there. He has a history of taking the best players available, as well as occasionally going underslot or what would seem to be a underslot option. But again, you have to always remember that those are external things. And as the negativity goes, try to keep the negativity to the major league roster. It's not fun sitting through what we see every single day in, day out. It's not fun. But the development system is going well. Yes, you can be mad about the incentivization of tanking and the like and all that sort of thing. But, direct that to Major League Baseball, who has such a system in place. And hopefully the next CBA will take measures on that. Try to keep the negativity focused on where it's going to be, namely Major League team to a certain extent, and to Major League Baseball for essentially enabling the practice. But this is the time for hope, for having a positive outlook, because there are a lot of great options in this draft, and the development system's doing their job. If you want to try to look at the silver lining of all the losses of, next year's number 1 pick, Elijah Green, he's being touted as the best prospect since Bryce Harper. Wouldn't you like to have that sort of, and he's a high schooler, wouldn't you like to have a shot at that? Yes, it sucks, but, keep the negativity focused on where it deserves to be.
All I know is Arizona needs to start winning ball games. All right.
Amen.
On to another underslot option, which we have seen mocked in some places to the Orioles. Harry Ford, another catcher, this time a high schooler. He has a profile that isn't very common with prospects. It's a high school catcher who many people think can stick a catcher, but he's also athletic enough to move around to other positions and have success. So kind of similar to the Henry Davis discussion. What if the Orioles were to go underslot and take him there? What would be the game plan, do you think, with a guy like that?
Okay, so the athletic catcher is a really interesting demographic, especially the athletic catcher who can play, outright premium positions possibly. And there is some history of this, like Dalton Varsho, Connor Wong in 2017, Dylan Dingler last year from Ohio State spent time in center field in his first couple of years, Will Smith back in 2016. But the thing is, the high school catchers is a real tough demographic if you look back at it historically. So since 2009, which is where I start training my model, there have been 17 high school catchers drafted in the first round. 5 have made the majors. They've combined for 416 at-bats with 1.5 career wins above replacement across all of them. That's pretty rough. Now, that's not to say Ford isn't necessarily an option. Now, if he's drafted, you can take send him off of a catcher to another position if you see him as a center field type of guy, because he apparently is a true 60 runner sort of thing. He's not, clogging up the bases or anything like that. But if you draft him at catcher, it would be a slow development at catcher. Apparently, he's a little rough around the edges, and most high school catchers generally are. It's very rare that you see a very advanced high school catcher, it seems, from a defensive and pitch handling and staff handling point of view. So it would be a slow catch development, and it would be, he might be, it's hard to say where his like center field development would be. You could say that it's easier to pick up than catcher. I'm sure there are career outfielders who would say differently, but let's give catcher its due. It's the hardest position on the diamond to really grasp. So you would have to assume that his development would be a little bit faster. So his score right now, where I have him, is at 13.3, which is 17th overall. It's not necessarily a risk that I would want to take at 5. That said, if you go underslot with him at Colton Cowser at 5, he could be someone that you might try to overslot and kind of pay down at 41 maybe, because that $1.5 million very conveniently takes that 41 up to around, well, it depends on, again, how much of a haircut you can get the guy to take. Let's see. Let's see. $1.5 million would get him up to, around slot 15 to 19, which is right about where he's ranked in Baseball America. So he could be an overslot guy. I'd feel much more confident, much more comfortable with him as an overslot guy than as the underslot option at 5, me personally.
So it's, Ford is a name to consider, I guess, for this next question, which is if the Orioles go underslot at number 5, who would be available for them and their overslot bonuses? They have 4 of the first 76 picks, including 5, 41, 65, and 76.
Okay, so breaking this out, at 41, yes, Ford's right. So right on the cusp of the $1.5 million. Assuming Cowser takes, assuming you pay the guy the 11 slot. If it's Cowser or anyone else, assuming the guy takes the 11 slot, that's $1.5 million, give or take. And at that point, Ford is right on the edge of making that possible from 41. Really, anything between like slots 15 to 19, any guy in that area, that's the slot that you'd be looking at paying a guy for if you upped 41's bonus by $1.5 or so million. So Ford's there. Joe Mack's another high school catcher, although they think he's at catcher and much more likely to stay at catcher. So he's a little less likely. Bubba Chandler could be interesting. Bubba Chandler, two-way player. He'd be the number 21 ranked guy as a shortstop, number 22 guy as a pitcher. So he's actually a 4-star QB and is signed by Clemson right now. So you'd have to overpay. Not overpay. You'd have to definitely pay him. You couldn't pay him 41 money. You'd have to pay him to make him an option possibly. So he's a guy that could be interesting if you want to go the college route. Because really, if you're overslotting a guy, it's high schoolers or college age eligible sophomore type of guys or really big talent types. So if you're willing to take the risk, Gunnar Hoglund could be a guy. He was looking like a top 5 guy before he tore his UCL. Right now, Baseball America has him ranked 18. My draft model doesn't care that he tore his UCL, only to the effect that he lost some innings and opportunity to throw. But my draft model has his score at number 10. If he, hadn't tore his ACL and the season had just stopped there, he'd be the number 10 guy. So if you're willing to take the risk, take a look at the medicals, do the due diligence, he could be a guy that could be overslotted and, got in for number 21, 22 sort of money. And even then you'd have a little bit of opportunity. As you go further on down, there are a bunch of other guys that you could dream on. I mean, let's see, Will Taylor actually is another Clemson football recruit who's ranked 26, who you'd have to pay. You could get him at 41 or maybe even 65, depending on how much you pay up. If you want to go high school pitchers, if you really have that sort of appetite for risk. Chase Petty threw 102 miles an hour in a bullpen this year. He's a guy that you could maybe try to price down to 41 or 65. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Frank Mazzucato is another guy who's had a big jump up over the year. You could maybe play him down to 65 if you're willing to pay up a bit. Let's see. College guys. Troy Melton had a decent year out on the West Coast. He's a lot lower ranked, but he's been a performer. So you might be able to get him for even underslotting at later picks if you had to. If they did the thing that I very much not expect and, sign Rocker for a little bit extra of a bump of money. Troy Melton could be a guy, essentially the reverse of this, save a little bit of money later on, who's a performer and has some opportunities there. So again, there are definitely options there. And there are some exciting ones. I mean, I'd be really excited about Gunnar Hoagland. I'd be excited about Harry Ford as the underslot guy. Chase Petty, Matsukata, all those guys. I would be excited for them to be the underslot guy, depending on who the overslot guy is. I have some opinions on, or not the overslot, the underslot payoff, I guess you could say, depending on who they sign at 5. I have some opinions there, but there's enough interest in that back end that if they go underslot, it's not a waving of the white flag or anything like that.
So let's backtrack. What are your opinions there for number 5?
I really love Khalil Watson and Brady House. I like the ceiling that those guys bring. I think I like Watson better than House, just by a tick. Those are the guys that I would really like to see going at that point. If they're just determined to go the underslot and say, get one of these really high value guys, I want to see Kauser be the guy. Like, there's a lot of discussion that it would be Frelick. Like, I see it. I understand. I'm just worried about the lack of power. Matt McLean, his score is horrible, I will say, but he's a guy that I think exceeds his score. He had a real rough first year, but there are enough tools there, and he does play a premium position, all that sort of thing. But just all that said, I really like Watson and House. I really want to see those guys in the organization and really, we've seen Gunnar Henderson rise up so much in the last couple of years, from where he started to where he is now, just inside, the top hundreds, and has the chance to rise even further. While that's great and all, Watson has a better floor, I think. Watson and House both have a better floor and a better ceiling. I think they can be a lot, and I really want to see what the player development could do with those guys. Again, if they go underslot, I want Colton Cowser. I'll be perfectly honest about that. He's the guy that I want. I want to take a bet on that 97 mile an hour and higher fastballs that he's turning around on those. Like, I don't care if it's a small conference. He's the guy I want on the underslot.
Nice. Yeah, I'm curious just in general if Orioles fans are, getting kind of burned on the Kerstad pick for right now. And of course, we hope he's healthy and can get back on the field. And then it seemed like, I don't know if this ever came out or if it was just rumor that Nick Bitsko was the guy that they were targeting, why they went so underslot, and Tampa Bay swiped him away from the Orioles. So I wonder if Orioles fans are now, if they see a Sal Frelick, is the roof going to collapse on among Orioles fans at that point?
Again, like, there are tools there. A 60 hit tool is nothing to sneeze at. A 60 hit tool, 60 speed, 60 field, that is solid. I just think there's more that I just worry about the power. So much of the league is true. Like, your hit tool can be wonderful, but you can say defensive positioning, you can cut down on hits. It's harder to argue with a little bit extra power on that end of things. So again, like, yes, I do think there are better options, but Frelick's still nothing to sneeze at. He would be a good guy. And again, it's all about value. If Frelick signed for $3 million under slot and is spread across guys all throughout those next 3 picks, hey, I'm not going to argue with that. Everything has to be taken in terms of context in that way. So, don't let things develop as they will as the draft goes on. Don't evaluate the number 5 pick until we've seen at least through 76.
So I think we can answer this next question on the timeline about ranking the top 4 prep shortstops from the Orioles' perspective. But is there anyone outside of those 4 that could be a surprise pick in this range?
In the top 6 sort of range?
Yeah.
Ooh. Jackson Jobe could move up a little bit. Like, he's 8. Like, it's not that big of a jump. But like, there are people who, again, like, it's the whole thing of, well, this is what the lower ranked high schoolers, he's in number 8 right now. In 3 years, he could be the number 1 pick, and you get on that on the relative ground floor sort of thing. So there is thoughts that he could be, when it's all said and done, the best for best, the pitch, when it comes down to pitch for pitch, the best guy out of the whole, best pitcher out of the whole draft. There is thoughts of that. So he could jump up there. Any other guys that jump into that top 6 range, I think, are more there for the financial concerns. than anything else. Job is the guy that I think could jump into those top 6 picks and it be truly I think this talent is just that high, is just that highly ranked, and that ceiling is high enough that he makes me want to make that jump. Anyone else, it's a little bit more, in my opinion, of a stretch, just due to the question marks that exist. Again, South Relic would be that guy, but I think there's going to be questions about the power and all of that thing. Maybe the exit velocities are better than the numbers, underlying numbers suggest. Like with a 170 ISO, you would not expect an average 95 mile an hour exit velocity. You would not expect that at all, even with aluminum bats. But maybe they're better that teams are willing to take that bet. But really, it's just Job that I think could jump in there.
All right. Well, how about a late round sleeper, maybe outside of the top 5 rounds or so? Any of those guys that fit the Mike Elias mold of that power bat, with maybe not quite the strike zone avoidance as you would usually expect, or maybe like a fastball curveball type of pitcher who he thinks he can mold into the next Kumar Rocker?
So there are more pitchers, I think, than there are hitters in terms of that sort of range right now. A lot of those guys that are those big power bats, think like Nico Cavadas sort of thing out of Notre Dame. He's an older guy. Like he's going to turn, he's going to be 21.7 on draft day, which is usually a senior's age, which that's going to knock, from an analytical perspective, that's going to knock his score back. There's no way around it. But there are a few guys. Let's see. So Justin Henry Malloy. This isn't the Elias mold, but he's a guy. So he's an infield guy, second base, third base, a lot of walks, above average raw that hasn't really fully tapped into yet. So he's ranked 241 by Baseball America. That's about where my model has him as well. But there's some room that could be growing there. And also, again, for that sort of thing, if you're going to get a guy who might have a little bit extra pop in there or something like that, I want him playing something other than corner outfield or first base. And the fact that he's a possible second base, third base guy, that has some value there. Let's see. Braden Olthoff is a guy that could be interesting. So Baseball America has him 168. My model has him 75. He's been a performer. He has a below average fastball, big stats, strikes out guys, controls the walks. Reports are a plus slider and plus control. So maybe a little weighted ball program might add a mile an hour or two on there. That could take him from being like a, back into the rotation to a 2 or 3, which at that range, if you're talking getting picked in the 5th, 6th round, you turn him into a 2 or 3 type of guy in a rotation. That's value. That's great value that you can get there. So those are the guys that I would kind of keep an eye on. There aren't a ton of incredibly great late sleepers that are outside of the top 5 rounds. There are a few guys that I like in like the 4th round range that I have a lot higher scores on because they're performers that could see a big jump. Chad Dallas is one of them. Who's the Vanderbilt or not Vanderbilt? Who's the Alabama pitcher? Dylan Smith is a second round sort of guy that I think, or that the model has based on his performance in a big conference and all that, has him as a late first rounder sort of thing. So there are more guys that are in the top 5 rounds that I think are being undervalued just because of the stats and all that than there are late sleepers outside of that. But Olthoff is one he's one that's interesting. He's one that I could see making a jump, especially given the fact that he does have a plus secondary, plus control, plus command sort of thing. Well, the command's not necessarily half plus, but plus control and a below average fastball. There's something to build on there, especially with the performance.
That's good information.
He's fun to watch too. I remember watching one of his early starts, and I think the other opposing team was trying to get him a check. They're trying to check his glove for some sticky before. This was early in the season, and it turned into quite the contest.
I'm sure.
Pretty quickly. I liked him a lot.
So, Steven, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Who would you take? You're the Pirates now. We're going to pivot over to this number 1 pick. Who do you take with the number 1 pick? And do you expect the Pirates to actually make that pick, or do you think they're going to go in a different direction?
The Pirates. I should have called it. So I have a cousin's husband who lives up in Pittsburgh. He's a high school baseball coach. I'd be curious his opinion. He actually he coached Dan Altavilla in high school before Altavilla became a first-round pick and faced Brendan McKay. So he's seen good players and all that. I'd be very curious his thoughts on where he wants the Pirates to go. But if it's me, let's see. I'm torn between, I say, even if Leiter is the number 2 on my board, I'm still torn between Lawler and Mayer. And I think I have Mayer above. I think I look at the grades that people are putting on the two, and Mayer has a tick more power, 55 power compared to Lawler's 50. Same sort of hit tool. And they say Mayer might be the best defensive shortstop. And the thing that people are really playing on for ranking Lawler above Mayer is Lawler is a better athlete. Lawler has a 60 run time versus Mayer's like a 45 run time. But even with a 45 run time and that less athleticism, people are convinced that Mayer is the best defensive shortstop in the draft. And that includes college players too, or at least definitely the best high school defensive shortstop. And so I look at all that and I wonder why Lawler is ranked higher. I guess they're banking on the athleticism being able to turn into a higher tool rate. But me, I would rather bet on the tools that seem to be there and the potential that seems to be there for a little bit more power for this defensive ability that is clearly there, and a hit tool that, we're ranking at like a 60 grade hit tool. That's right there around the plus level sort of thing. And 55 power is a great thing. And he's playing a premium position. For me, I think I would lean Mayer. I think he is worth the slot that he's going to command. If he takes number 2 money, that's even better. That'd be wonderful. But if you have to pay him like a number 1 pick, I think he's going to be worth it. That said, still try to negotiate with him, of course, like you'd be a fool not to. But do I think the Pirates? I do think the Pirates are going to go that route. If they don't, I think it's Lawler. So I do, I would lean Mayer, and I think that's who he's going to. I think that's who Pittsburgh's going to lean towards as well.
So we have a listener question here. Simkin Tribute over on YouTube. Elias has gone light on pitchers in 2 drafts. Do you believe this is his philosophy or the strategy he had to adopt due to the inventory in the system he was presented with?
I don't necessarily think so. So when you're ignoring 2020, when you're evaluating a draft, like rounds 20 through 30, or you could even in some cases say rounds 15 or 10 through 30, are all about stocking out the minor league system in many cases. Like, you take flyers, you do draft and follow guys, but you need to make sure that, Delmarva can field a team, basically. So yes, if Delmarva was stocked with arms that can work and that you're willing to develop, sure, maybe you're going to go light in those later rounds. But looking at those top rounds, yes, he's gone light. I think it honestly is in many cases because, there were a few guys there, but I think it has more to do with the talent that was presented, the fact that pitchers are a little more variable, the fact that maybe you can get a pitcher who is serviceable in the 15th round, whereas hitters, it tends to fall off a little bit more. You get a guy, starter out of a small conference in the 15th round, you convince him to drop his 3rd pitch, focus on 2 pitches, suddenly he's a credible reliever. There is more ways to get value out of pitchers later. So I think it has less to do with the system that he was presented with in terms of when you're looking at the top end of the draft and more to do with the overarching philosophy that he has, again, rather than the inventory that was there.
So Vivek on YouTube has a question here. Could they do what they were trying to do with Spencer Torkelson, meaning the Tigers, and shift Henry Davis to third base?
Sure, why not? I mean, I say, does Detroit have I'm so out of touch with the major league things at the moment. Does Detroit have a particular catcher in place? I mean, if they do, if they do, great. But if they don't, why would they move Davis off the catcher?
I have one more question then. We kind of end it with this, I guess, maybe. You're sitting down on draft night, put you on the spot here. You're sitting down on draft night. How are you hoping this board falls to the Orioles in your dream scenario here?
I'm hoping, so the top 3 picks, I'm fairly confident, some form of Mayer, Lawler, Leiter. So that aside, I'm hoping the Tigers take either Davis or Job. I really don't care which. I just really want Khalil Watson or Brady House to both fall to the Orioles. That's how I hope it falls. I want to see those 2 guys in the system because I want to see what those 2 guys can bring. I'm fine if it's Colton Cowser for the underslot. I can be flexible with the other underslot options, but if they win underslot, I really want to see Colton Cowser. And for the rest of the draft, I would like to see I'd like to see pitchers who have plus secondaries, good command, good control. Maybe they need a little bit more work on the fastball. I think fastballs can be worked on a little bit more than secondaries in many cases. I'd like to see an established breaking pitch, maybe the inklings of a changeup and a fastball that, you can add a few miles an hour to. And I want to continue to see up the middle athletes who can have the positional flexibility to move around. And I'd kind of like to see someone who can eventually be a second baseman.
All right. It seems like we have one last listener question here. It's from Orioles_tweets on Twitter. And he says, Henry Davis seems like he has great makeup. How much do teams value that at this moment in time? Do you think, is that going to make or break? Is it more of a tiebreaker, or is it valued a little bit more than that?
I'd say at most it's a tiebreaker. Like, there are going to be guys that there are definite stop, red flags, stay away. And it's going to vary by team. There are going to be some red flag guys that you just take them off the board. That said, DL Hall had questions going into 2017. There were a lot of questions about DL Hall going into 2017 about makeup and the like. And I'm sure Orioles fans are thrilled that he fell to the Orioles. And there was a certain level of falling. And that he has developed like he has. But again, makeup isn't necessarily everything. At most, it's going to be a tiebreaker. And in some cases, we have to remember, especially with high schoolers, these kids are 18. Like, they're going to do some growing up, or at least hopefully they will. If there is a certain immaturity level, hopefully they will do some growing up as they're put into a professional environment and surrounded with professionals. So at most, it's a tiebreaker. But even so, as a tiebreaker, it's not the be-all, end-all. And there are going to be guys that have those sort of questions that 2 years down the line, you're going to wonder, what the heck was that about?
So, Stephen, thank you so much for your insight tonight. Can you give our listeners where they can see your work outside of here? I know you're a co-host at The Warehouse and contribute to Baltimore Sports and Life. So can you tell our listeners where they can see your work?
Yeah, sure. So I generally update my scores. Well, they're going to get updated a bit more. Let's see. I mean, basically, anytime Baseball America updates their rankings, so that'll probably happen at least one more time. And there are 3 college games left, so I'll have to update them after that. But I update the scores and post them at my personal blog, Sabermetric Sandlot, where, again, that's where you can find all the latest updates for my scores. In the next few days, this has been a year-long project, but I should finally have individual player pages where you can dig into, okay, the fact that specifically, let's see, Marcelo Mayer has a score of 34.42. When you break it down, that's 18.5 runs above replacement with a replacement level of 18.8, positional level of 0.75, and a 90% chance of making the majors in his career. Breaking down all of those individual components. So I should, hopefully, fingers crossed, have those player pages up and running by the end of the week for at least like the top 100 or 200 players. If I'm lucky, maybe I'll even get the full 500 that I have scores for right now. But that's where you can find all of my updates. I occasionally will post a blog post there on something. I'm in the process of working on an article about the underslot question from a more holistic view beyond the Orioles. So that should be interesting, and I'm sure will be of a lot of interest to Orioles fans, given the team's history, shall we say.
Well, Stephen, we always appreciate your insight. So thank you again for joining us. And before we completely wrap up for the night, Bob and Nick have some news about our upcoming shows, which are going to be big ones.
Go ahead, Nick.
You booked it. You go ahead. You announce it.
All right. So for our 50th episode next week, we are going to have Matt Blood, the director of the farm system, on the podcast. Much like this, probably be an interview show, but hey, get your questions in now. Start thinking, because if anyone has answers to the questions we have as Orioles fans, it's probably going to be that guy.
Yeah,
round
absolutely.
of applause. Sorry.
Oh. Yes. Well, and Bob, thank you for the work you did to put in that guest booking right there. And we're really looking forward to having him on. And we really appreciate Stephen's time tonight. We'll be back next week with Matt Blood, the Orioles Director of Player Development. In the meantime, you continue to follow us on Twitter at BSL and The Verge, and check out BaltimoreSportsAndLife.com, where Stephen will have updates to his draft model and has a new one today. Bob has 2 new pieces up on the site you should check out, and Nick and I will, of course, be posting there. And be sure to hop on the message board and join the discussion. For Stephen Loftus, Nick Stevens, and Bob Phelan, this is Zach Spedden, and you've been listening to On the Verge.